Simon Parkin.
BBC Radio Somerset.
Now, a quilt that tells the story of, well, a slice of British social history. People who died from an illness that they were too scared to talk about is coming to the West for us all to see. The UK AIDS Memorial Quilt is made up of panels designed by the loved ones, the friends and family of people who died in the early days of the HIV and AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s. According to the World Health Organization, more than 70 million people have acquired the infection since then, and about 35 million people have died. Around 37 million people now, thanks to treatments and advances in medical science, live with HIV. Steve Wintergrey is the chairman of the charity, the North Somerset LGBT Forum. Morning, Steve.
Good morning, Simon. How are you?
Really good, thank you. It's lovely to have you here this morning. Tell us a bit about the charity, first and foremost.
Well, the actual North Somerset LGBT Plus Forum is run entirely by volunteers and unpaid trustees. So we were formed back in 2014, 2015, originally to support the LGBT plus community within North Somerset, and we're based out of Weston-super-Mare. So we actually run different support groups on a weekly basis and different events such as a Rumble and the Jumble sale every week to check in with the community, not just under the guise of the LGBT plus forum, but to anybody that wants to come in and have a chat to us about what we do and to see if we can signpost them to any local services that we've got access to just to help them. And certainly on the back of the lockdown where the loneliness and isolation really did affect people, we like to think that we can give something back from a community standpoint, not just about the LGBT plus community, but from the community as a whole, so we can grow our ally army.
Rumble in the Jumble. I love that. That's my favourite thing of the day so far. Let's talk about this amazing quilt. When did you first hear about it?
Well, I actually first heard about it due to one of my trustees, Dave Frost, who was actually the project lead on this, actually mentioned it during one of our meetings. And if you got a chance to meet Dave, he is a force to be reckoned with, that when he gets an idea in his head, nothing will stop him to bring this forward. And this has actually got a personal element attached to Dave, and the reason why he wants to bring this to Weston-super-Mare is that he grew up in Weston-super-Mare, and he grew up through this terrible, terrible time. And he lost some very, very good friends and very close friends to this terrible, terrible illness. And as such, he wanted us to do something fairly monumental in our quiet seaside town in order to do something to actually mark how important it still is to try and erase the stigma that is attached to that illness.
If you are the same age as me, or perhaps a little bit older, or maybe just a fraction younger, you would remember, firstly, how frightening the adverts made it sound, and secondly, how much, and we call it fake news now, but of course, back then it wasn't quite the same, but there was so much propaganda about this disease, and there was no cure. As you say, an awful lot of people in a very short space of time lost their lives ever so quickly. Thankfully, the world has changed. Science has improved incredibly. And if you are now diagnosed with HIV, there is a very good possibility that you can lead a very normal life compared to someone who was going through it right at the very beginning. But so many lives, as we say, were lost. And this quilt, describe what's on it, because these panels are very personal again, aren't they?
They are incredibly personal. Essentially, the quilt itself tells the story of the lives that were lost in the early days of the HIV and AIDS epidemic. The quilt itself is unique and it's irreplaceable as far as being a historical document. And it comprises of about 40 12 by 12 feet panels, and then each made of 8 smaller panels as well. And the smaller panels commemorate someone who has died of AIDS and has been lovingly made by the friends and family or by their lovers. What's also nice is it's not just the quilt that we're looking at. There's also testimonials, photos, personal documents, all telling the stories behind some of the panels themselves. And the quilts themselves represent about 384 people from across the UK that actually died from this terrible illness. It does remind us how far we've come in the fight against HIV. And it's as a positive to come out of it. It's no longer just has to stop from someone living, as you've said previously, a normal, healthy life. A thing to really remember is the campaign at the moment that we're working alongside the Eddystone Trust, which is that undetectable equals untransmittable. And that's the thing that we're really trying to push. And we're going to have plenty of support services attending the Winter Gardens in Weston-super-Mare on the day that people will be able to talk to, because we do understand it's going to be a very emotive piece of, certainly a piece of art and certainly a very emotive event.
And whilst the focus is very much on the names on the quilt, the people whose lives are being remembered, because of, and we know bereavement and grief is just a very difficult thing to get your head around, whatever the circumstances, but because AIDS was so high profile at the time, because things happened very quickly, the families, the friends who lost loved ones probably are still unable to get their head around what happened.
Yeah, it's a very true point. It's as you said, the stigma that was attached to it was so apparent. I mean, there's one very unique quilt that actually exists that generally they're displayed as a random group of 8 on a large panel, and they're about the same size each as a standard grave. But originally, the collection was called the Names Project, but some of the families of the victims didn't want their family names featured on the quilt, which caused even more sadness and heartache for those who had made the quilts for their loved ones. And that was such as the stigma of the disease in the 1980s. I mean, we've actually got one in particular, and I believe it's one that's going to be coming with us, that actually just has a white panel covering the entirety of the quilt. And on the front of that panel, it says, "This panel was made by a friend for a friend. The parents do not want this panel shown anywhere. The stigma still exists. Until this changes, this panel will remain covered. A red ribbon is not enough. The guilt is not enough. What will it take? Attitudes must change." And that itself, even reading that now, chokes me up, because we still know that the stigma is there, but we are doing something about it by bringing this collection of quilts down to this beautiful building in Weston-super-Mare, right on the seafront, and we want to encourage people to come in and actually see them from themselves. It's a completely free event. We want people to really understand the emotion that existed behind what was going on back then.
Also, part of the quilts involves people who perhaps were more well known, who died from the disease. So one of the panels remembers the life of the writer Bruce Chatwin, the filmmaker Derek Jarman, the actor Ian Charlton, who was one of the stars of the Chariots of Fire movie, and Denham Elliott, of course, who for many years was an accomplished stage actor. He was in all of the Indiana Jones films as well, wasn't he? And it is so lovely that their stories are being told as well, because again, a lot of their lives, and because of the careers that they were in, they wouldn't have wanted to share that information with anybody.
No, absolutely not. And the thing is, if you think about what they were trying to do back then in their professional careers, and very much being under the spotlight, this was something that they had to keep so quiet, and it was so personal, because essentially, if that got out, it could destroy somebody overnight. And it's horrible to think that is it's not just that effect on your health, but also the suffering up to. And it's upsetting to think what we had to go through back then, but the significant amount of progress that we have made today.
Well, it's been a joy talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can we see the quilt? When is it on display?
So the exhibition is scheduled to run for 4 days, from the 2nd of May to the 5th of May. That's next week. So it starts Bank Holiday Monday from 12 till 4 on the Monday, and then 10 till 4 Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And that's at the Weston-super-Mare Winter Gardens on the seafront. So everybody's welcome to come and attend. We would encourage people to come and attend, bring friends, family. We're encouraging the local education establishments around Weston and North Somerset to also use this as an educational tool as well. It's going to be opened by the town mayor, Councillor James Clayton, on the morning of the 2nd of May. And you can find all updates about what we're actually doing, how we're doing it, on our Facebook, Twitter and Instagram pages for the North Somerset LGBT+ Forum.
Well, it's been, as I say, an absolute pleasure having you here. Good luck with the next Rumble in the Jumble. And thank you for coming on, Steve.
Thanks very much indeed, Simon. Steve
Wintergrey there, who is the chairman of the charity, the North Somerset LGBT+ Forum. As you said, you can find out more on their Facebook page and online. 10:36.